The First World War did not just redraw borders, it rewrote the future. In the mud-soaked trenches of Europe, under skies filled with artillery fire and poison gas, something else was being born. A new kind of warfare driven by invention, desperation, and relentless innovation. In this documentary, you will discover 20 fascinating technologies created during World War I, machines and ideas that transformed battlefields forever. From the first tanks crawling through barbed wire to invisible radio signals guiding armies, from chemical weapons that shocked the world to medical breakthroughs that saved thousands, this is the story of how total war forced humanity to innovate at terrifying speed. This is not just a story about weapons, it is a story about how modern warfare and the modern world began. It's great to have you here. If you enjoy these war journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought in the comments below. This helps others find their way here too. For now, let's begin our journey. When the guns opened in 1914, Europe marched to war with 19th century tactics. Generals expected cavalry charges. They believed in swift maneuvers and decisive offensives. What they got instead was industrial slaughter. The stalemate on the Western Front forced every major power to innovate or collapse. In that crucible of mud and steel, technology became survival. One of the most revolutionary inventions of the war emerged from the British response to trench warfare: the tank. The idea was radical: an armored vehicle capable of crossing trenches, crushing barbed wire, and resisting machine gun fire. In 1916, during the Battle of the Somme, Britain unveiled its secret weapon, the Mark I tank. It was slow, unreliable, and mechanically fragile. Many broke down before reaching German lines, but those that did advance caused panic. German soldiers had never seen anything like it: steel monsters crawling through smoke. The tank was not immediately decisive, but it changed the psychology of warfare. For the first time, mobility returned to the battlefield. By 1918, improved models were playing a key role in breaking the stalemate. Another terrifying innovation was chemical warfare. In April 1915, near the Belgian town of Ypres, German forces released chlorine gas against Allied trenches during the Second Battle of Ypres. Soldiers described a green cloud drifting silently across no man's land. When it reached the trenches, lungs burned, men choked, clawed at their throats, and collapsed. The shock was global. Though poison gas had been banned by international conventions, desperation overrode restraint. Soon, all major powers developed their own gas programs: chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas. Protective technology had to evolve just as fast. Early cloth masks soaked in urine were replaced by increasingly sophisticated gas masks with filters and sealed eye lenses. It was a grim technological race: kill and counterkill. Above the trenches, another revolution was unfolding: in the air. At the start of the war, airplanes were fragile reconnaissance tools. Pilots flew unarmed, sometimes even waving at each other. But reconnaissance quickly proved decisive. Armies that could see enemy movements had an enormous advantage. The next step was inevitable: arm the aircraft. The breakthrough came with the synchronization gear, perfected for Dutch engineer Anthony Fokker for Germany. This mechanism allowed a machine gun to fire through the spinning propeller without hitting the blades. Suddenly, aircraft became deadly hunters. The age of the fighter ace was born. Pilots like Manfred von Richthofen, the infamous Red Baron, became legends. Air combat was personal, deadly, and technologically driven. By 1918, aircraft were conducting bombing missions, ground attacks, reconnaissance, and air superiority battles. The skies were a battlefield. Under the seas, another innovation changed naval warfare forever: the submarine. Germany's U-boats were not new inventions, but World War I transformed them into strategic terror weapons. Unlike traditional battleships, submarines could strike invisibly. They targeted merchant vessels supplying Britain, attempting to starve the island into submission. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania in 1915 by a German U-boat shocked the world and helped shift American public opinion toward war. Unrestricted naval warfare blurred the line between military and civilian targets and introduced brutal strategies. Technology was no longer just about battlefield tactics, it was about total war. On land, one of the most underestimated but vital innovations was barbed wire, cheap, mass-produced, and devastatingly effective. Originally developed for agriculture, it became a defining symbol of trench warfare. Machine guns combined with barbed wire made frontal assaults suicidal. The machine gun itself had existed before 1914, but in World War I, it became king. Defensive positions equipped with water-cooled heavy machine guns could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Entire battalions could be cut down in moments. This forced innovation in artillery. Artillery became the deadliest killer of the war. Massive guns like Germany's Big Bertha could bombard cities from miles away. Creeping barrages, coordinated artillery fire moving forward in stages, were developed to support infantry advances. War had become mathematical, timed, engineered. And then there was communication. Field telephones connected trench networks, but lines were constantly cut by shell fire. Runners risked death crossing open ground. Carrier pigeons returned to service, surprisingly reliable messengers. One pigeon, named Cher Ami, saved nearly 200 American soldiers after delivering a critical message despite being shot. Meanwhile, wireless radio technology advanced rapidly. Though early sets were bulky and unreliable, they allowed for more flexible command structures. Intercepted radio transmissions also created new forms of intelligence warfare. The war did not just innovate destruction, it accelerated medicine. The scale of casualties forced breakthroughs in surgery and trauma care. Blood transfusion techniques improved dramatically. Mobile X-ray units, pioneered by figures like Marie Curie, allowed doctors to locate shrapnel without invasive probing. The understanding of infection control improved as surgeons confronted mass injuries. Plastic surgery advanced as doctors attempted to reconstruct shattered faces, giving birth to modern reconstructive techniques. Even the wristwatch became a wartime innovation. Soldiers needed hands-free timekeeping for coordinated attacks. What had been considered a women's accessory became standard military equipment. Every aspect of daily life was transformed by necessity. World War I was not only a clash of empires, it was a laboratory of modernity. Industry, science, and engineering merged with warfare at unprecedented scale. Governments mobilized entire economies for research and production. Universities collaborated with military planners. Civilian factories retooled for artillery shells, aircraft parts, chemical production. By 1918, warfare had changed so fundamentally that pre-war military doctrines were obsolete. The trenches of France and Belgium were not just battlefields, they were testing grounds for the 20th century. And this is only the beginning. By 1915, the war had settled into a brutal rhythm. Shells screamed overhead, mud swallowed men whole. Trenches stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland in a scar that cut across Europe. The stalemate was suffocating, and stalemate is the mother of invention. If Part 1 revealed how tanks, poison gas, submarines, and aircraft shocked the world, now we descend deeper into the laboratories of desperation. Because World War I did not simply create new machines, it forced armies to invent entirely new systems of detection, assault, mobility, and survival. One of the most terrifying close combat weapons to emerge from this environment was the flamethrower. Developed and first deployed in significant numbers by German forces in 1915, the Flammenwerfer was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. During the Battle of Verdun, German assault units used flamethrowers to clear French trenches and bunkers. Survivors described walls of fire pouring into confined spaces. The weapon was heavy,
dangerous to operate and vulnerable to enemy fire, but its shock value was immense. It symbolized a shift in warfare. Technology was no longer just about range and firepower, it was about terror. Alongside flamethrowers came specialized assault troops, Germany's stormtroopers. These stormtroopers used new infiltration tactics supported by portable weapons like light machine guns, grenades, and flamethrowers. Technology enabled a change in doctrine. Instead of massive waves of infantry charging machine guns, small flexible units bypassed strongpoints and attacked weak spots. Modern combined arms tactics were being born. Meanwhile, artillery, already the deadliest killer of the war, became increasingly scientific. Early in the war, artillery required visual spotting to adjust fire, but trench warfare made visibility difficult. Enter sound ranging and flash spotting. Sound ranging involved placing microphones along the front lines to detect the acoustic signature of enemy guns. By calculating the time delay between microphones, technicians could triangulate the position of artillery batteries. Flash spotting used observers to record the visible muzzle flashes of enemy guns, mapping them with remarkable precision. By 1918, these systems allowed counter-battery fire to neutralize enemy artillery before it could devastate infantry. Warfare had become a contest of physics and mathematics. Another, less dramatic but equally transformative innovation was camouflage.
Before 1914, military uniforms were often bright and colorful, relics of earlier eras. The war quickly erased that tradition. The French, who began the war wearing blue coats and red trousers, suffered heavy casualties. Soon, drab, earth-toned uniforms became standard. Camouflage extended beyond clothing. Artists and scientists collaborated to design disruptive paint schemes for vehicles, artillery, and even ships. Dazzle camouflage was applied to Allied vessels, bold geometric patterns intended not to hide ships but to confuse enemy submarine commanders about their speed and direction. Technology met psychology once again. Mobility behind the lines also demanded innovation. Armored trains, though not new, were modernized and heavily armed during the war. These mobile fortresses transported troops and artillery across vast Eastern Front distances. In Russia and Eastern Europe, where front lines were more fluid, armored trains provided firepower and rapid response capability. Motorized transport expanded dramatically as well. Trucks replaced horses in supply roles wherever possible. The internal combustion engine proved indispensable. The war accelerated automotive technology by years, perhaps decades. And then there were grenades. Though primitive explosive devices existed before, trench warfare made hand grenades essential. Confined trench systems required portable explosives to clear dugouts and corners. Both sides developed increasingly sophisticated designs. Fragmentation grenades with timed fuses that could be thrown before detonation. Grenade warfare became so central that entire units specialized in their use. Below the earth, another silent war unfolded. Mining operations involved digging tunnels beneath enemy trenches and placing massive explosive charges. At the Battle of Messines, British forces detonated 19 enormous mines beneath German lines. The explosion was so powerful, it was reportedly heard in London. Thousands of German soldiers were killed instantly. It was industrialized subterranean warfare. Above ground, sniping technology also evolved rapidly. Telescopic rifle sights became more precise. Snipers operated in concealed positions, often in specially constructed steel observation shields embedded in trench walls. Patience, optics, and precision turned individual marksmen into strategic assets. Communication technology continued to evolve as well. Signal lamps, semaphore flags, and field telephones were supplemented by increasingly portable wireless sets. Though still bulky, these radios allowed artillery units and headquarters to coordinate more efficiently. Code breaking became a science.
When Germany sent the Zimmermann telegram in 1917 proposing a military alliance with Mexico against the United States, British cryptographers intercepted and decoded it. The revelation, later shared with Washington, played a major role in bringing America into the war. Technology was no longer confined to battlefields. It shaped geopolitics. At sea, anti-submarine warfare technologies began to emerge in response to German U-boats. Depth charges, explosive devices set to detonate at specific underwater depths, were developed to counter submarines. Hydrophones allowed ships to listen for submerged vessels. Convoy systems were introduced, grouping merchant ships under naval escort. It was a strategic adaptation powered by communication and coordination technology. The war had become a technological arms race in every domain: land, sea, air, and intelligence. Even logistics underwent transformation. Standardized mass production techniques expanded dramatically. Interchangeable parts allowed faster repairs of vehicles and weapons. Rail networks were optimized for troop movement. Portable bridges were designed for rapid river crossings. The sheer scale of the war demanded industrial precision. On the medical front, innovation continued at astonishing speed. The Thomas splint, introduced widely during the war, dramatically reduced mortality rates from leg fractures by stabilizing limbs during transport. Antiseptic techniques improved. Organized triage systems categorized the wounded based on survivability, a heartbreaking but necessary efficiency. Facial reconstruction techniques advanced under surgeons like Harold Gillies, who pioneered procedures for soldiers disfigured by shrapnel. Modern plastic surgery owes much to these wartime efforts. Even nutrition and food preservation evolved. Canned rations, field kitchens, and innovations in food transport allowed armies of millions to sustain prolonged operations. World War I was not simply a clash of armies, it was a clash of systems. Every innovation triggered a counter-innovation. Every breakthrough created a new vulnerability. The battlefield became an ecosystem of adaptation. By 1917 and 1918, warfare bore little resemblance to the summer of 1914. Tanks coordinated with infantry and aircraft. Artillery used scientific targeting. Communications traveled invisibly through the air. Submarines hunted beneath waves. Medicine raced to keep pace with destruction. World War I was teaching humanity how to fight industrially, and these lessons would not be forgotten.
When the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, the guns fell silent. But the machines did not disappear. The First World War had unleashed a technological storm that would not be contained by peace treaties. Many of the innovations born in desperation during those 4 years did not vanish with the trenches. They evolved, they spread, they reshaped both military doctrine and civilian life. The war had become a proving ground, and its inventions would define the decades to come. One of the most important legacies was aviation. At the beginning of the war, aircraft were fragile wooden frames covered in fabric. By the end, they had become specialized machines: fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes. Engineers had learned hard lessons about aerodynamics, engine reliability, and structural reinforcement. The strategic bombing raids conducted by German Zeppelins over London and later by heavy bombers foreshadowed a terrifying future. Though primitive compared to what would come, these early bombing campaigns demonstrated something profound. Civilians were no longer safe from war. The development of strategic air power during World War I directly influenced the doctrines later embraced in World War II by figures like Hugh Trenchard and air strategists across Europe and the United States. The belief that air superiority could determine the outcome of wars was born in the skies over the Western Front. The tank, too, evolved rapidly after 1918. Though early models were slow and unreliable, the concept had proven its value. Military thinkers like J.F.C. Fuller and Heinz Guderian studied the lessons of late-war armored assaults.
They envisioned fast, coordinated armored divisions working alongside mechanized infantry and air support. 2 decades later, those ideas would manifest in Blitzkrieg. The trench-busting machines of 1916 became the spearheads of mechanized warfare in 1939. Communication technology also advanced far beyond its wartime infancy. Wireless radio systems, once bulky and unreliable, improved steadily in the interwar years. Lessons learned from battlefield communication, the importance of speed, encryption, and interception, shaped military planning worldwide. Intelligence gathering and code breaking, sharpened during World War I, laid the groundwork for the sophisticated cryptographic battles of World War II. The interception of the Zimmermann telegram had proven how powerful signals intelligence could be. In the next global conflict, entire operations would hinge on decoded messages. But the technological legacy of World War I was not limited to weapons. Industrial mobilization changed economies permanently. Governments had learned how to coordinate factories, research institutions, and transportation networks at unprecedented scale. The concept of total war meant that civilian industry was now inseparable from military power. Mass production techniques refined during the war accelerated modernization in automobiles, aviation, and manufacturing. The war had compressed decades of technological progress into 4 violent years. Medical advancements also carried forward. The improvements in trauma surgery, blood transfusion, antiseptic procedures, and reconstructive techniques transformed civilian medicine. Techniques developed to treat shrapnel wounds would later save countless lives in hospitals around the world. Even rehabilitation programs for injured soldiers helped shape modern physical therapy. Another critical development was chemical engineering. Though chemical weapons horrified the world, the research infrastructure built to produce gases like chlorine and mustard accelerated broader chemical industry growth. Fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, and industrial compounds benefited from the expansion of chemical science, a dark reminder that even destructive innovation can spill into civilian progress. And then there was mechanization. The internal combustion engine, trucks, tractors, and motorized logistics reshaped transportation. Armies that once relied heavily on horses began transitioning toward vehicles. The war had demonstrated the limits of animal-powered warfare in an industrial age. By the 1920s and 1930s, mechanization became synonymous with modernity. Underwater warfare also matured.
Submarine development continued after 1918 despite treaty limitations. The lessons learned from German U-boat campaigns would influence naval strategies worldwide. The concept of economic warfare at sea, targeting supply lines rather than fleets, remained a powerful strategic doctrine. In the air, aircraft carriers began to rise in importance, influenced partly by the growing understanding that control of the skies, and by extension the seas, required mobile air power. World War I had shifted the center of gravity in warfare from manpower to machinery. The human cost of adapting to these machines was staggering. Entire generations of soldiers had been introduced to mechanized slaughter. Machine guns mowing down charges, artillery barrages calculated with mathematical precision, gas drifting silently through trenches. These experiences shaped military psychology. No major power entered the interwar period unaware of how devastating modern technology could be. And yet, instead of rejecting these tools, nations refined them. The Treaty of Versailles attempted to limit Germany's military capacity, but innovation did not stop. Secret research programs continued. Other nations invested openly in armored divisions, air forces, and naval modernization. The technological race had merely paused. Even civilian life felt the aftershocks. Wristwatches, standardized during the war for synchronized attacks, became fashionable and practical accessories. Aviation moved into commercial travel. Radio communication entered homes. Mass production expanded consumer markets. War had accelerated the 20th century.
Perhaps one of the most profound changes was conceptual. Before 1914, war had often been imagined as heroic maneuver and decisive battle. After 1918, war was understood as industrialized annihilation. Technology had stripped away illusions. The battlefield was no longer just a field, it was an integrated network. Artillery coordinates calculated by sound detection, infantry advances timed by synchronized watches, air reconnaissance guiding ground assaults, submarines threatening distant supply routes. The systems approach to warfare, combining multiple technologies in coordinated strategy, became the blueprint for modern military doctrine. And yet, there was a tragic irony. Many of the innovations designed to break the stalemate of trench warfare were refined too late to decisively change World War I. Tanks, coordinated artillery tactics, infiltration strategies, these reached maturity in 1918. Just as armies began mastering modern combined arms warfare, the conflict ended. The knowledge, however, remained. In the next war, it would be unleashed with devastating efficiency. The First World War did not just create new weapons, it created a new mindset, one where science, industry, and strategy were inseparable. When people think of World War I, they picture trenches, mud, barbed wire, and endless artillery. What they often do not see is the invisible architecture beneath it all. The engineering, the experimentation, the rapid adaptation that turned a 19th century battlefield into a prototype of modern war. By the final year of the conflict, 1918, technology was no longer experimental. It was integrated, coordinated, systematic. The last phase of the war revealed just how far innovation had come. During the Allied 100 Days Offensive, beginning in August 1918, tanks, aircraft, artillery, and infantry were deployed together in synchronized assaults. The British and French no longer used tanks in isolation. Instead, armored units advanced under creeping artillery barrages, while aircraft strafed enemy positions and disrupted reinforcements. This was not the chaotic experimentation of 1916. It was the birth of modern combined arms warfare. Engineering also transformed the battlefield in ways rarely highlighted. Military engineers developed portable bridges capable of supporting tanks and heavy artillery across rivers and shell craters. Rapid trench digging tools and reinforced concrete bunkers became standard. Defensive systems incorporated layered barbed wire, deep dugouts, and interlocking fields of machine gun fire, creating defensive networks rather than isolated positions. War was no longer linear, it was structural. Naval aviation, still in its infancy, also made significant strides. Aircraft launched from modified ships began reconnaissance and limited strike missions. Though aircraft carriers as we know them today would not dominate until World War II, the concept was proven. Sea power would increasingly depend on air power. Detection technologies quietly evolved as well. Hydrophones improved submarine detection. Sound ranging equipment became more precise. Engineers experimented with early forms of radio direction finding, enabling commanders to estimate the source of enemy transmissions. Though primitive compared to radar, these systems marked the beginning of electronic warfare. And perhaps most importantly, coordination improved.
Early in the war, attacks often collapsed due to miscommunication. By 1918, synchronized watches, improved signal systems, and better command structures allowed complex operations involving thousands of moving parts. Precision had replaced improvisation. Even battlefield lighting advanced. Flares and illumination rounds were used to expose nighttime assaults. Signal rockets transmitted coded messages. Night operations, once chaotic and rare, became more organized through technological support. Meanwhile, innovation extended far beyond combat. Mass production methods developed to supply artillery shells and rifles influenced global industry. Assembly line techniques refined during wartime would later fuel economic growth in peacetime economies. Governments learned to mobilize science on a national scale, funding research and coordinating industrial output with military demand. The relationship between state, science, and industry had permanently changed. The war also forced moral confrontation. Chemical weapons had introduced a new horror. Though gas accounted for a smaller percentage of total deaths compared to artillery, its psychological impact was enormous. Soldiers feared invisible clouds drifting silently across trenches. Civilians feared bombing raids from the sky. Technology had expanded the battlefield beyond sight lines. The idea that innovation was inherently progressive, that science automatically improved human life, was deeply shaken. World War I revealed that scientific brilliance could just as easily engineer devastation. Yet, paradoxically, innovation also saved lives. Medical evacuation systems improved survival rates. Blood transfusion techniques developed on the front lines became standard practice. Reconstructive surgery restored faces once thought beyond repair. But lessons learned under fire became pillars of modern healthcare. This duality defines the technological legacy of the First World War: destruction and advancement, horror and progress. The internal combustion engine, refined under military necessity, revolutionized transportation. Aviation leaped forward, communications networks expanded, industrial coordination became more efficient. But the cost was nearly 20 million dead. By the time the guns fell silent on November 11, 1918, warfare had entered the industrial age completely. Cavalry charges and colorful uniforms were relics of a vanished world. In their place stood tanks, machine guns, aircraft, submarines, coordinated artillery, encrypted communications, and mechanized logistics. Every major military power left the war understanding one undeniable truth: future wars would be decided by technology. The interwar years did not erase these lessons, they intensified them. Nations analyzed after-action reports, engineers refined prototypes, strategists debated doctrine. The innovations that had emerged in mud-filled trenches were polished, streamlined, and prepared for the next conflict. And when World War II erupted in 1939, it was clear: the foundation had been laid between 1914 and 1918. The blitzing armored divisions, the strategic bombing campaigns, the submarine blockades, the radio-coordinated offensives, all of them traced their lineage back to the laboratories and battlefields of World War I. The so-called war to end all wars did something else entirely. It engineered the modern world. Today, many of the technologies we take for granted, aviation travel, advanced surgery, coordinated logistics, mass industrial production, carry DNA from that global catastrophe. The First World War was not just a geopolitical turning point, it was a technological awakening, a brutal one. 20 innovations born in desperation reshaped humanity's relationship with war and with machines. They taught nations to fight faster, farther, and more efficiently than ever before. They proved that science could tip the balance of power, and they warned, in blood and smoke, that progress without restraint carries consequences. The trenches are gone, but the century they created remains. If you made it all the way to the end, comment the word innovation below so I know you stayed until the final minute. I want to hear your thoughts. Which of these World War I technologies surprised you the most? If you found this documentary valuable, leave a like to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into military history, and keep watching. The next videos appearing on your screen will take you even further into the untold stories of war. History is not just about the past, it is about understanding the forces that shaped our present. And this was one of the most powerful forces of all.